This week, for a special edition of Chopper's Election podcast, I've left the Red Lion pub and I've come to a pub near Guildford to meet a former Tory leadership challenger and Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt.
Hello, Chris.
Hi, Jeremy.
Welcome to Surrey.
Thank you. The last time Jeremy Hunt joined us on this podcast was on a train in his constituency during the leadership campaign back in July, during your 9th year in the Cabinet. In that interview, Jeremy Hunt told us he would allow a vote to repeal the fox hunting ban. One of just two, maybe little mistakes he made during his leadership campaign. Do you still want to legalise fox hunting, Jeremy Hunt?
I support the government position.
which you don't know yet.
Well, no. I think the position is that this is not coming back now
Exactly.
for a vote. So I think the matter's closed.
Exactly. But very generously, you're back on the podcast. And as we all know, in that leadership campaign, Jeremy Hunt lost the campaign by 2-1 amongst the membership, but by all accounts fought a very credible campaign and held the current Prime Minister to account in a number of different ways. Not long afterwards, Jeremy Hunt turned down the role of Defence Secretary in Boris Johnson's government to avoid displacing his Brexit supporter, Penny Mordaunt. And then, well, not very much, really. He had a chat with the BBC, LBC's Ian Dale, and that's about it. So could this silence mean that Jeremy Hunt's gearing up for a return to frontline politics in a Boris Johnson government? Well, I'm here with the Tory candidate for South West Surrey over a pint of, water in the Seahorse pub. Jeremy Hunt, what was it like to watch Boris Johnson in the ITV head-to-head debates?
Well, it was a slightly strange feeling, actually, because, I did think that could have been me. And, of course, the layout was identical, but I never actually watched myself after doing the debate with Julie Etchingham. But I remember it was, without doubt, the most scary moment of my entire professional life doing that debate. I wonder if it was for Boris as well, but, we arrived up in Salford and...
the same studio, I'm sure it was.
Exactly the same studio, exactly the same layout. And we were asked to stand on stage in silence for 5 pregnant, heavy minutes before the show went live, and it was,
the audience were there watching.
The audience were there watching. I was there. Boris was there. Julie Etchingham were there, and it's sort of one of those moments where your whole life flashes in front of you, and you think to yourself, "I am going to screw this up."
But you got your lines right, didn't you?
Yeah, it went well in the end for me, but so it's a nerve-wracking moment.
Do you find yourself shouting at the TV advice for Boris Johnson?
I think he's seasoned enough to know what he wants to do.
One thing I thought didn't happen was they didn't look down the barrel of the camera, which I think is what Nick Clegg did so well in 2010. When the light's on, talk to the voter at home, because that's what the votes aren't in the room, they're at home.
I
don't know why that didn't happen.
Well, I think they're both pretty experienced, and I wonder whether they had the kind of coaching that you often get in these situations where people tell you those things. But I thought the other thing that was interesting was there wasn't quite enough interaction between the two of them.
No.
Which is what makes those debates interesting for viewers, to actually see these two people, except perhaps at the very end when they were asked what Christmas presents they would give each other.
Yes. Are you pleased you're fighting an election in winter? You're wearing a nice jumper. It's freezing cold. It's getting me down, having been all over the country with Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson so far this week.
Well, the pros and cons of winter elections. I've never fought one before, but one of the surprises, actually, is that people are in a lot more than you think when you go out canvassing, because people do stay at home in winter. So
after 4 or 5 p.m.
And people do open the doors. People were worried, I think, that no one will want to open the door when it's dark, but actually they do. I think the con is that it's just terrible for your waistline, because when you go out in the cold, as soon as you come inside, you fill yourself up with biscuits and cakes and everything. So we're all piling on the pounds.
Would you have called an election if you were in the same position as Boris Johnson? There was no real way through the impasse in Parliament, was there?
I don't think he had a choice. I think the moment that programme motion was voted down, it was a kind of code that Parliament, despite pretending to let the deal through by voting for it, actually wasn't really going to. And I think he had to go for the election. And I think for Leavers and Remainers alike, the central question is, do we want to unblock Parliament? Because the British Constitution doesn't really work with hung parliaments. We have an adversarial system. It's served us very well over the years. It means that politicians here are much more held to account than in other systems. But unfortunately, in a hung parliament, it also means that MPs just aren't able to make the compromises necessary to get stuff done. And in other countries where they're used to hung parliaments, that happens. Doesn't happen here. And I think we need a Conservative majority. So not just so we can get Brexit done, but so we can get anything done.
Even if Brexit is a national issue, isn't it? I mean, that was the thing that the EU 27 looked at us and wondered why you weren't talking more to Jeremy Corbyn at an earlier point. I know why that is, because the nature of our politics is adversarial.
Absolutely right. And there is an argument that, given that Labour, the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives, all three parties promised to honour the referendum result, that in that hung parliament people should have put their Leave Remain allegiances aside and help the Brexit deal through, whether under Theresa May or under Boris. That was just not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, how are the Tories fighting their campaign? Are you happy with this rebranding of a Twitter account called FactCheck UK? It was the CCHQ press account being rebranded.
Well, look, it was a mistake, but on social media, we're all finding our way. And, there's a huge amount of misinformation being pumped out by Momentum every day about the so-called Tory plans to privatise the NHS, which are absolute nonsense and always have been.
He was about that, wasn't he, Boris Johnson?
He was right to be angry.
Yeah.
It's just a straight lie. And 8%
of it is so far sold off to or privatised in the quotes. Is that right?
Well, this is the ridiculous thing, because none of the NHS is privatised, as in you don't buy shares in hospitals. We subcontract about 8% of the services offered by the NHS to independent sector providers, and I think that's gone up by a couple of percent since the Conservatives are in power. Hardly earth-shattering. So there is no privatisation agenda, and I'm afraid it's just that scare story that you get from Labour election after election, that the easiest way to get people to vote Conservative is to scare them about the NHS. All I would say to Labour strategists is this did not work in 2015. I know, because I was Health Secretary. It didn't work in 2017. I know, because I was Health Secretary. And I think the British public have wised up to the fact that if there were any ulterior motives with respect to the NHS, they'd have seen them by now, and there aren't.
Do you think the parties need to be quite careful not to play fast and loose with trust online? If you look at the Keir Starmer video was doctored towards the end, when I didn't think it needed to be, because he was already in a bit of a hole and digging on the Good Morning Britain, and on this fact check thing, it's slightly needless, I think, because especially if you want to be Prime Minister, either Jeremy Corbyn or Boris Johnson, you should be above all this.
It is needless, and I agree with you. We're all finding our way on social media, but I would just say this, the fundamental issue of trust is whether or not we implement Brexit. And people say to me, you voted Remain, how can I trust you to implement Brexit? Someone said that to me yesterday on the doorstep. And I say quite simply this: if we do not implement Brexit, around half the country will think we don't live in a democracy. And there will be the most devastating, catastrophic loss of trust in the democratic process. And however passionate you are on one side or other of the European issue, that profoundly important sense of being a democratic country, which we are known for across the world. Our history, whether it's the suffragettes, the Great Reform Act, whether it's the Second World War, this is a country that has shed blood for democracy, and we imperil that at huge potential cost.
I mean, Labour's offering a delay, aren't they? 6 to 9 months, or probably more than that. Maybe they want to get the deal in 6 months and then have a referendum after 9 months. But I mean, and then the transition is open-ended, reading the manifesto published on Thursday morning.
It's not a delay. They want to stop Brexit, and that's the purpose of offering a second referendum. And, that is not going to unite the country.
Yeah.
And we're very divided after Brexit. But if you have a second referendum, if the result was reversed, you'd have about half the country that have voted twice to leave. They'd be incredibly angry. The way to unite the country is to deliver the referendum result, but then make sure it's a sensible Brexit that the 48% who voted Remain can live with.
Well, just on that, I mean, on Boris Johnson, he has got a deal where they gave a deal which I know your plan was to have got to get together in September and rework the deal. But what he came back with is it feels like both sides are giving more. And you're surprised by that, are you? Or you?
Yes, I mean, I thought it was going to be difficult to get rid of the backstop by the end of October, and fair play to Boris, he succeeded, and I think that's a big step forward.
Yeah. How's he done? Marks out of 10?
Well, in terms of predictions that were made in the leadership campaign, I mean, I predicted that we would end up with an election before we left the European Union.
Correct.
And Boris didn't. I was right on that one. But I also said it'd be very difficult to get rid of the backstop by the end of October. I thought it might take a bit longer, and Boris was right on that one. So I think it's 1-1.
I think you also said we wouldn't leave in the end of October. Did you say that, or did you say?
Yeah. No, I thought we wouldn't leave by the end of October, and I was right on that. But I think broadly speaking, Boris has surprised everyone by the fact that he got that deal. I think he persuaded Varadkar to be flexible, and he deserves huge credit for that, and that's why we are in a position now where we can leave with a deal.
Yeah. And he used the pressure of no deal to get that deal, didn't he?
He did, and that's why you can never take no deal off the table.
No,
that's
the point of it.
Basic rule of negotiation. I don't know if you know this, Chris, but I used to be a businessman. In fact, I was an entrepreneur.
I've got a question here.
It's quite unusual.
Are you still an entrepreneur?
But that's one of the first rules of business.
I think I was part of that. I'm afraid I got that going in New York hustings because you said it 2 or 3 times. I heard it, and then we started teasing you on Twitter, and then it became a running gag for the travelling press pack.
But, the funny thing is that
it's true. I'm not doubting it, by the way.
No. It was you think of what lines you're going to use in these leadership campaigns, and this was the surprising hit.
Yes,
because much as you tease me for it, actually amongst the Conservative Party faithful, that is a big badge of honour.
Well, I think it should be, and in fact, amongst Telegraph readers, I think it's a fantastic badge of honour, and the business hot course is a great success. Do you think Boris Johnson gets a fair press? I mean, the abuse he gets online is really bad.
Well, we have got 2 party leaders now who are Marmite characters, with chunks of the population loving them and chunks of the population loathing them. And I think what's going to happen in the last 3 weeks of the campaign is that people are going to look behind their immediate emotional reaction to 2 party leaders who arouse strong emotions, and they're going to look at the substance, and they're going to say, in this general election, there is a real choice in a way that we sometimes...
Unlike normally,
in the way that sometimes parties dress up the differences. If you think about the difference between New Labour and Cameron's Conservatives, sure, there were differences, but both parties probably exaggerated those differences. This time, there is a very stark difference on Brexit. One party is going to deliver it, the others want to stop it. And there's a very stark difference on the economy. One party is an avowedly Marxist party in favour of huge redistribution, deeply sceptical about capitalism. The other party is a more traditional centre-right party in that respect.
What Labour's offering is a massive seize back control by the state, aren't they? I mean, and do you think, on top of Brexit, which is causing a near nervous breakdown amongst the political parties and the elite of the establishment, to add in what Labour's offering is extraordinary.
It is, an incredibly dangerous platform, and would do enormous damage to the fabric of the country. And one of the disappointments about a campaign that is inevitably overshadowed by Brexit is that we aren't able to make the argument that Conservatives want to make, that if you care about poverty, if you care about the NHS, if you care about schools, then the one thing you don't do is trash the economy, which is what would happen under McDonnell.
Are you following the detail? There's a case of Simon Chang, this former employee of the UK's Hong Kong consulate, who claims he was tortured in China and accused of inciting political unrest. Have you been following this?
Well, I have, of course. And
what do you say about his case?
Well, I hope we're going to give him a British passport, full British passport, with full residence rights here. And I think it's absolutely right that Dominic Raab summoned the Chinese ambassador to say that his treatment and torture was totally and utterly unacceptable.
Yeah, and the muscular way he's behaving, Dominic Raab, following your example, I imagine, is what we need to do with China over Hong Kong.
Well, China has to know that we do have an interest because, in a way, our legacy to Hong Kong has been one country, two systems, and this guarantee that the freedoms that they enjoyed when it was British will continue, and that is enshrined in an agreement not between Britain and Hong Kong, but between Britain and China, two sovereign countries.
Jeremy Hunt, what's life been like? What's the best thing about not being Tory leader and Prime Minister?
Being able to take my kids to school. Frankly, I could have done it before when I was in the cabinet, but I didn't. And that's what happens. You make all sorts of small compromises. When you take kids to school, it's a curious thing, but I actually cycle with my son. Quite terrifying, actually, with a small kid in front of you on his little bike, and I'm behind him on my big bike.
On the road?
Yes, but you get a chance to have chats about things and...
Just incidental things, not big chats, just chats.
And it's lovely having that in my life.
I think David Cameron did his once a week, twice a week. I think
he did.
He said, we were told he did anyway. We never saw it happening, but we told it did.
Yes. I think the problem is, though, that sometimes when you have those big offices of state, your mind is a bit preoccupied with whatever it is you've got to do during the day. So I have enjoyed that, and I have also enjoyed spending a lot more time in my constituency, who were very long-suffering when I was doing those big jobs in the cabinet. But we've got some big local issues around here. I'm a Surrey boy; it's where I grew up. Yeah. So it's been great to get more stuck into some local issues.
Do you miss the trappings of office, living at Carlton Gardens and as Foreign Secretary, or do you miss any of that?
I can truthfully say not at all. Really? I think all Foreign Secretaries, until the day they die, have a little corner of their heart that is reserved for Chevening, which is the most beautiful house to have the use of.
How often did you get there when you were Foreign Secretary?
Perhaps once a month. But I think, all that is more than compensated for by having a bit more quality time with the kids.
Yeah. And what have you learnt about them?
What I've learnt about kids is that I can't do my son's maths homework.
Terrifying, isn't it?
That's what I've learned.
I think they're taught in a different way. That's like, it's a problem.
Let's tell ourselves that, shall we?
Draw a veil. As an entrepreneur, are you an entrepreneur? You still are one.
Do you know something? I am.
You are. So you can do maths. You're an expert.
A little bit. I can do Excel spreadsheets, but I'm not sure I can do trigonometry.
So your days now are you can manage them better. You can get home for tea. You can be at home on Fridays and all that kind of thing.
Well, my days now, I'm obviously spending every day in the constituency. Yes. And I'm still pretty busy. I want to lead important parliamentary campaigns on abolishing illiteracy, boosting our defence spending, and making sure that the Conservative Party is better at connecting with young people. So lots of exciting things that you can do from the backbenches.
Yes. Well, you mentioned defence there, and of course you were rumoured to be offered the job of defence in the current government and didn't take it out of respect for Penny Mordaunt, who then lost the job in defence. Do you want a job in the new Boris Johnson's government if he wins the election?
I'd love to go back to the front line eventually, but not straight away. I'm very happy being a dad, and there are so many things you can do from the backbenches, important campaigns that I want to do.
Any ideas
now? I also campaigned hard as Health Secretary on patient safety, and I think that's on everyone's minds with the terrible story at Shrewsbury and Telford. And so I think there's a huge amount more we need to do to raise the standards of safety in the NHS to stop these terrible things happening. So lots of exciting things to do.
I saw you tweeting about that this week. And you're writing. What are you writing?
I'm writing a book about patient safety in the NHS and the sort of problems that we saw at Shrewsbury and Telford. It's important to say this is not just an NHS problem. We have problems over the covering up of baby harm and baby deaths all over the world. The sad truth is that, when something awful happens, like a baby dying in a hospital, no one likes to confront the fact that it could have been because of a mistake. But if you don't confront that, you don't learn from what went wrong, and you don't prevent it happening another time. And so what we need to do in the NHS and in hospitals around the world is move from a blame culture to a learning culture.
Or a saying sorry culture. I mean, my experience of this personally is it's hard to say sorry when companies hurt you or do something bad. people are slow to say sorry, and I think if you're a victim, that is the thing that matters the most, or not the most, but a big deal of it is someone owning up and saying we're sorry. But lawyers stop you saying sorry, don't they?
Well, absolutely. I remember when I was health secretary, I used to reply personally to one letter every day from a member of the public who wrote in talking about some problems they had with the NHS. And the first letter I replied to, the Department of Health sent it back and said, you can't say sorry. And I said, actually, you can, because the law is very clear that just saying sorry is not an admission of legal liability.
There should be more saying sorry from public bodies, I think, when it goes wrong.
I completely agree. But then that's the first thing. My experience, and I met hundreds of patients who've had difficulties in their healthcare, and what they want, without exception, is not money. They want an apology and some knowledge that lessons have been learned and the same mistake is not going to be repeated.
So it's a move away from the defensive crouch, basically, isn't it? Both the NHS, but I think it's a wider thing across all government, by the way. I don't think it just...
It is, but part of the problem, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the doctors and the nurses and the midwives. If they think that by being open and transparent and saying sorry they're going to get fired...
or sued, or whatever.
Then they don't want to do it. And so that's why we need a culture change to move. I mean, I once said I want the NHS to become the world's largest learning organisation. Now, if you look at other industries like the airline industry, they have massively improved their safety by
recognizing... It's so investigated, it is so thoroughly...
But also by recognising that pilots are human, people are going to make mistakes. You shouldn't just automatically take away the licence from a pilot who makes a mistake. The key thing is to understand why and what you can do to stop other human beings making the same mistake in the future.
What's the book called and when's it out?
Haven't yet decided on a title, and I think it'll be the latter half of next year.
So that's going to be taking a lot of your time up between now and...
It does take time, absolutely.
So you're thinking about a return to government if you're offered the position, it wouldn't be all of next year, but the year after that?
I think, as I say, I'm still a young 53, so lots of excitements in front of me, but for the moment I'm very happy where I am.
I've got to ask you a question. If the ball came free at the back of the scrum, would you grab it and go for the leadership again? You are a young 53.
One day, I may well do that, but after Boris has had a long and highly successful premiership, including get a majority at the next election.
I was going to ask you where your unfinished business is in the government. Do you have any unfinished areas? You did held many of the great offices of state, didn't you? Well,
I don't think in politics you can ever look at a job and say that's got my name on it. You have to be prepared to see what happens.
What was your biggest achievement in office, do you think? If you look back on what you did,
I would say by the end of my time as health secretary, there were, I had to deal with Mid-Staffs, Morecambe Bay, Southern Health, a huge number of care scandals. And by the end of my time, 2.7 million more patients were using good or outstanding hospitals compared to when I arrived. Yeah,
there's a question here from the Telegraph WhatsApp group from Samuel Leonard on Clacton-on-Sea. What would you want your political legacy to be? Perhaps even looking forward beyond just now as a young 53-year-old.
Well, in terms of... Thank you for calling me young, by the way. Happy to do the podcast anytime. Look, in terms of what's happened to date, I think improving the safety culture within the NHS and more people being treated in good or outstanding hospitals is the thing I'm most proud of. Going forward, I would like to campaign for Britain to be a strong country on the global stage post-Brexit, and for the Conservative Party to be much, much better at connecting with young people.
Yes, well, yes, perhaps through Twitter and other areas, or just...
Not just social media, there's got to be substance there as well.
Yeah.
People have got to trust us on issues like climate change, they've got to trust us on education reform, and they've got to know that the Conservative Party isn't just good for their wallet, it's good for their values too.
Yeah, that point on the wallet is key. So, your party message is saying you have more money to spend as you see fit, whereas the Labour will do it for you. And then,
we're always going to be the party of aspiration.
But entrepreneurialism too.
And entrepreneurialism, absolutely. But we also have to show people that there is a bigger, broader, more generous vision to conservatism, and that we have the wider interests of society at heart.
Geoffrey Whitehead from St Leonards-on-Sea asked, do you feel that you let down those who voted for you by not taking a position in government?
No, I would have been very happy to carry on as Foreign Secretary. There were particular circumstances which you've alluded to, which is why I felt I couldn't take the job that was offered to me. But I always promised that I would loyally support Boris if he became leader, and that's what I've done.
Tim Rutter on Twitter asked, what was your nickname from school?
The one that's talkable about on this podcast.
We can bleep out the word.
Yes. I had a whole range of nicknames, but here we are. I'll tell you a world exclusive.
Go on, give it to us.
At school, I was called Jerry, not Jeremy. Thank goodness that's gone.
Jerry Hunt. Blimey O'Reilly. So very, very final question is a game of Would You Rather, given it's nearly Christmas and we're having a pub together. Would you rather back Boris Johnson's Brexit deal or Theresa May's?
Boris Johnson's, no backstop.
Would you rather get stuck on a zip line over London or break another bell?
Well, I've done the bell, so I'll go for the zip wire this time.
With some flags.
Yes.
Would you rather be trapped in a lift with a junior doctor or an angry bear?
A junior doctor, because they've all got a heart of gold underneath. They really have, and they work bloody hard.
Would you rather be attacked by a horse-sized duck or 10 duck-sized horses, Jeremy Hunt?
Do you know, I can truthfully say that is not something I've ever considered before, but I'll go for the 10 duck-sized horses.
I think he was asked at the leadership launch of Mark Harper.
Really?
Yes. I think he said a horse-sized duck, but I can't remember. It became a thing on Twitter for a day.
I think it's something where, there could be some spoonerisms that could get you into big difficulty on that one.
Would you rather be part of a coalition government with Jeremy Corbyn or Joe Swinson as Prime Minister?
I want a majority. We are done with hung parliaments, and I don't want us to have one again.
Your perfect drink in a pub would be with Margaret Thatcher or William Wilberforce?
Do you know, William Wilberforce has always been my hero, and I'm going to choose him because I have met Margaret Thatcher, and obviously not met him.
Would you rather be Defence Secretary or Health Secretary?
Oh, I think they're both wonderful jobs.
So would you rather?
I'll settle for both.
Okay. Would you rather be able to fly or be invisible? My producer Theo wrote these. They're brilliant, though.
Yes. Now, gosh. Do you know? Before my political career started, if you'd asked me that question, I'd have said I'd rather fly. But having been a politician, I think the gift of being invisible is something I think we all yearn for. On
Brexit, would you rather a trade deal with the US or a trade deal with the rest of the world?
Oh, we've got to have trade deals with everyone. We are global Britain.
Yeah,
we've got to be trading with everyone.
We can do. Would you rather be an Olympic gold medalist or a Nobel Peace Prize winner?
Goodness me. They're both wonderful. But given that I was absolutely useless at sport, I'll have to go for the Nobel Prize.
And the final question, Jeremy Hunt, would you rather leave the EU or remain?
I want to leave. That's what people voted for. We can make a huge success of it.
Jeremy Hunt, that's it. Thank you for coming on Chopper's Election Podcast. It's been great fun. Thank you.
Happy Christmas to you.